Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to do a little time traveling. We are going to sift through the news from a single week in February of 1927, and we're going to search for any hidden warnings, any clues of the great crash that was looming just over the horizon.
So you have to picture it, winter 1927. The mood in American business, well, it was one of just supreme confidence. This quote right here, it's about the railroad industry, and it really captures that feeling, you know? This idea of unstoppable progress and that all the experts were firmly in control.
And why not? The economy looked incredibly strong. Production was hitting record levels, and for most people, the future seemed just absolutely limitless. The Roaring '20s were definitely in full swing.
Okay, so let's really dive into this and see what we can uncover. We're going to pick apart just 1 week's worth of news. Remember, this is a full 2.5 years before the stock market's catastrophic fall. What could we have seen?
On the surface, if you just glanced at the headlines, the economic news of February 1927 was just overwhelmingly positive. It really painted a picture of a nation that was enjoying this unprecedented, never-before-seen prosperity.
And look, this wasn't just a vibe or a feeling in the air. The actual data backed it all up. The Federal Reserve Board itself confirmed this amazing growth, reporting that American industry had literally never been more productive.
You see, this faith in progress, it was built on an almost religious belief in two things: technology and scientific management. The whole idea was that through pure efficiency, any problem could be solved, and that meant future growth was basically guaranteed.
But, and this is a big but, if you looked past all those gleaming headline numbers, the very foundation of all this prosperity, well, it was starting to show some pretty alarming weaknesses.
So here's the crucial point. Even with a little dip in borrowing, financial experts were already ringing the alarm bells. They were openly warning that the stock market was dangerously over-leveraged. And what does that mean? It means way too many people were buying stocks with borrowed money. The whole boom was being fueled by speculative debt.
And this right here, this just perfectly illustrates the deep imbalance in the economy. Think about it. On one hand, you've got farmers producing so much stuff that prices were just collapsing. But on the other hand, whole industries, like the textile mills in New England, were completely falling apart, laying off hundreds and hundreds of workers.
Okay, so let's shift gears and head over to Washington, D.C. Let's see how these exact same economic tensions were playing out in the halls of Congress.
Right at this very moment, the two biggest pieces of legislation up for debate captured this whole divide perfectly. There was the McFadden banking bill and the McNary-Haugen farm relief bill. And guess what? They didn't pass because they were great bills on their own. Nope. They passed through this classic political move called log rolling, a deal between the powerful banking interests and the huge agricultural bloc.
Wow. This fiery quote from Senator Frazier just lays it all bare, doesn't it? It shows you the deep-seated populist anger and this profound mistrust between rural, agricultural America and the big financial centers of power back in the cities. But the American economy, it didn't exist in a vacuum, of course. A quick scan of the world news from that exact same week shows a planet that was absolutely simmering with conflict.
So you look over at China, and a brutal civil war is raging. Nationalist forces are locked in this massive battle for Shanghai, which was a huge international city and a hub for global trade. Now, unrest there didn't just stay in China. It had the real potential to mess up supply chains and rattle the international markets that American businesses were depending on.
Meanwhile, over in Europe, democracy was looking pretty fragile. In Portugal, you had a military dictator taking power, and he was using the threat of communism to justify his rule. And this wasn't an isolated event. It was part of this bigger, scarier trend of rising authoritarianism that was creating a really tense and unpredictable world.
Then there's Poland, where the government was right on the brink of collapse. The country's dictator, Marshal Pilsudski, had to literally make a dramatic appearance in parliament in his old uniform just to hold his government together. That level of instability in a key European nation was just another sign that the peace after the World War was incredibly fragile.
And of course, there was Germany. The economic pressures from the post-war reparations were fueling all sorts of political extremism. These rising nationalist movements were threatening to tear up trade agreements, and that just added another source of economic and political chaos to the mix. The whole global order just felt like it could shatter at any moment.
So, okay, let's take a step back from all these individual headlines for a second. What can this one single week in February 1927 really tell us about what was about to happen?
Well, it's pretty amazing, actually. When you stop looking at them as disconnected stories and you put them all together, a very clear pattern of underlying instability starts to emerge from all that noise.
You know, the key takeaway here is that the Roaring '20s was really a decade of huge contradictions. For all its glamour and all its growth, there were these deep, serious problems just lurking right beneath that shiny, prosperous surface.
And in the end, this one single issue of a financial newspaper leaves us with this chillingly prophetic thought. It's about the very fragile relationship between capital, labor, and the state. A relationship that, as we now know, would be tested to its absolute breaking point less than 3 years later.